So now that we have the players moving, they're able to collect the items. Now we need to keep track of those items and find out who is going to win the game. So each player, we're going to create what they call an instance variable. So each player needs to know or keep track of the items it's collected. So on this left-hand side in the properties, I'm going to go to instance variable. And I'm going to call this score for the variable name. The type will be number. Initial value is 0. Player has not collected anything, therefore the value is 0 for player 1. Player 2 as well. I'm also going to give player 2 a score variable. Now these are independent of these objects. They don't correspond to one another. So player 1 can have a score variable and player 2 can have a score variable. And so we're going to check and we're going to add to these when the players collect those collectibles. So back on the event sheet, that when the players are collecting or running into the collectible objects, that we are going to add to that score by 1. So we're going to add a brand new action for both of these. That on player 1 is that I'm going to go down to its instance variable and I'm going to add 2. And I want to add to the score by 1. And I want to make sure this runs first. So whenever the player collides with a collectible, I'm going to add 1 to the score and then destroy it. Same thing with player 2 here. Go to instance variable. We're going to add 2. Score by 1. And then make sure that's the very first one. Now, that's happening internally. We want to make sure that we can see this information happening. So we can go ahead and create some text objects that we can display that information. So I'm going to make 2 brand new objects here. These are going to be text objects. And I'll call this one player 1. Player 1 text. I'm going to put this in the upper corner here. I'm going to change its properties. So I'll put player with a 0. Let's see what 48 looks like. Make sure the bounding box here is true to size, otherwise the text will not show. I'm going to leave it black. I'm also going to change its alignment to center. I'm also going to change its origin to center as well. So there's for player 1. I could make a new object, or I can clone this object here, player 1 text, right click, clone, but instead of player 1 text number 2, this is going to be renamed to player 2 text. And then I'm going to change the default value in the text box to say player 2. So now that we have a representation visually here, we need to actually get this updating. So back on the event sheet, that when the player collects the item, I want to show that information. So on player 1 text, I'm going to scroll to the bottom and I want to set the text. And inside the double quotes, I'm going to write the word player 1 with a colon with a space. And on the outside of the double quotes, I'm going to use the ampersand and then player 1 object dot score for the score variable. That's going to print the number that's assigned to the score variable. This is a value. This is a string value. And then I'm going to have this happen second. So add 1 to the score, update the score, and then destroy the collectible. Same thing here for player 2. I'm going to set the text to player 2, not player 1, but player 2, and then dot score. That way each of them has their own independent score value that we can check on. So if I go ahead and play test, that up here player 1 has grabbed that score, and I'm seeing that happen up here in the text. And if player 1 grabs 1, it's also updating. So these are updating as each of the players collects an item, the score is being updated. Now, what happens when the player gets to score of 5? So we need to keep track of that information, and we need to know who wins based on that information. So I'm going to make one more new text object, and I'm going to call this scene text. Something very generic. We're going to make this rather large because it's going to go right here in the middle. And we'll say player, and we don't know who the player is currently. Let's go say, what does 96 look like? That's nice and large. I'm going to make sure this is all centered. My origins to center as well. And so we don't know, and we will only display this once one of the players collects 5 items. So I want this to be initially visible, or sorry, invisible. So on that property, on this scene text that has this default text here, that at the very bottom where it says initially visible, make sure you uncheck that so it's no longer visible. And we can do a play test to verify. So that text is no longer being shown. And then I'm going to double check here that we're going to compare. So when player 1, we're going to compare its instance variable. And we're going to compare, hey, does this score equal 5? If this score equals 5, then I want to show that information on the scene text. Player 1 wins. And then also, if a player does win, let's stop everybody from moving. So grab player 1. I'm going to go down to its platform behavior, and under set enabled, I want to disable the player from moving. And then we're going to wait. At the very bottom, I'm going to wait a few seconds here. Let's go 1.5 seconds, and then we'll just restart the level. So system or restart layout. And then I can duplicate this. I can do a Control-C, a Control-V, and then I'm going to replace these objects. So I'm going to right-click. I'm going to replace with player 2. I'm going to update this text to say player 2. I also want to replace this object because then you'll end up disabling just player 1 and not player 2. So now, if either of the players get to score a 5, it'll display that information. It's going to disable both players. Actually, let's do this. I need to make sure that I have both players. There's 1 and 2, that both players are being disabled. Wait for a second and a half, and then restart the level. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so player number 2, I've collected 1, 2, 3. If I go over here, that's 4. And as soon as I get this other star, I didn't show the text because it's initially invisible. We have to have it set to visible, and we never did that. So we've updated it. Now we need to make sure it's visible. So scene text, I'm going to go to under appearance, set visible to visible here, as well as down here as well for both players. So player 2, I've got 2 stars. There's 3, there's 4. So player 2 wins, it waits, and then it resets. So double check that as you're play testing with both players, that both players can in fact grab the stars. And once each of the players collect that number of objects, it freezes both players, lets you know who wins, and then resets the level. So double check that all your stuff is working, and we'll see you on the next game.